Hello there folks, and welcome back to another video. In this one we're going to be doing another 5 Things I Love style video where we're diving into a brand new Battletome for Warhammer Age of Sigmar, so you can get a feel of the factions and what I think of them. And in this case we're looking at the Nighthaunt, who are another of the death factions for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. We've seen quite a few of them already. Well, obviously we've seen the Flesh Eater Courts and the Soulblight Gravelords. Now we have the Nighthaunts. The last one to come will be the Osiarch Bone Reapers, I guess. But yes, diving into this one. This is another faction that I was particularly taken with when 2nd edition came around, but no one was really playing the game, so I wasn't really going to buy into picking it up. It's one of those forces which I think has always been described as this is a great one to get you started as a hobbyist. Maybe not necessarily as part of the rules side of things, but I really like how they work in terms of a hobbyist's project, because they're incredibly stupidly easy to paint, especially with the application of contrast paints and maybe a little bit of slap chop at the same time. Before we dive into the actual thing itself and have a look at the different things about the army that I enjoyed, I do want to say that I really enjoy what they've been doing with these sort of front pieces that they've added into the Battletomes for this edition. It's always interesting, before diving into exactly how the faction works, to have this, which is sort of like a snapshot of the faction, where you get an idea of how they work and sort of what their sort of USP is, and then you get a little bit of a story that normally comes from the viewpoint of the Forces of Order, and it gives you a sense of them as a sort of like an entity within the world and how Order sees that faction. And so it was really nice to have this one in here, which followed the Vendensts as they talked about defending themselves against the oncoming Nighthaunt in the midst of a graveyard somewhere, which I thought was really, really cool. Similar to what we had with the Flesh Eater Courts, which is the video that I did recently as well. I've really liked how these gatefolds, man. I absolutely love a gatefold and a lovely map. Oh my god, a good map which tells you where everything is and how it's situated is just fantastic, because it's perfect for campaigns, perfect for Path to Glory stuff, really good for working out what characters you're going to build and where they're going to take command of and all that kind of thing. You can sort of go off into the corners of the map, here be dragon style, and be like, this is where I'm going to set my campaign, blah blah blah. Anyway, solid stuff. Great to see it here. Maps are awesome. They help ground the world. One of the things that I really like about the Nighthaunt as a whole is I really love that they have taken the time to turn them into an interesting faction thematically. They could very easily have just been, again, just an offshoot of Vampire Counts and Soulblight Gravelord stuff, similar to what the Flesh Eater Courts were when it came to the ghouls that they had in their collection. But I really think that they've taken the time to build on the background of the Nighthaunt and sort of how they fit into the sort of overall scheme of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And once again, we have Nagash doing all of his Nagashy things. This is the core concept of the Nighthaunt that I think is brilliant. Nagash is the god of death, and he is also a little bit of a edgelord, I guess, maybe. A little bit of a memer, a little bit of an annoying prick. And so what he does is he takes those souls and he twists and bends them to be a mockery of what they were in life. So, for example, if you were a judge in life and you liked handing out the sentences to prisoners, and you took great revelry in that, he'd make you be that within this world. Or he'd twist it and he'd make it so that you were the person who was then in the stocks all the time, and you have to undergo consistent punishment endlessly throughout your life. If you were a snake oil peddler who went around using poisons and potions and that kind of thing, he'd be there to make sure that when you died, you ended up in some terrible situation where you were the person who was the potion seller for the dead, for the Nighthaunt. You had to go around handing out horrible things and toxins and all that kind of stuff to people around you. You were endlessly trapped within that. And I love that kind of irony, that sarcasm, that wit is sort of carried through into everything that you get as part of the Nighthaunt. And this page in particular is an exceptional example of that, because it goes through 6 different characters and how each of them was a certain way in life and then ended up in a terrible way later on. So, for example, there's a guy here who was the executioner, so he's now forever garbed in the headsman's garb, going around chopping people's heads off. There's a guy, I can't remember who it was, who is an escapologist here, who was an escape artist, blah, blah, blah. He was arrogant, he flirted with danger all the time. He would cheat death, which is obviously something that Nagash doesn't like. And so when he eventually screwed up and found himself buried, he was then wrapped up in these chains as a chains ghast, and sort of meant to suffer for the rest of his life in the same way that he died many years before. And I just love that kind of theme behind the army, because it means that if you're making your own force, maybe you're doing a Path to Glory campaign or something like that, then you can look at this and be like, okay, who was my character in life? What was it that ended up with him or her becoming this Lord of Undeath under the command of Nagash at some point? I think that's a really interesting sort of twist to things as part of this book. And also, as you can see here, there's plenty of ways for you to mess around with them and turn them into a terrifying force. I particularly liked, I think we'll get to them actually later on, the way that the miniatures are presented actually I think is really well done. They're, again, one of those factions that you could very easily paint with just, Wraithbone and then contrast paints, or you could do a little bit of slap chop in order to get the highlights and things out of it, and then whack on some speed paints or contrast paints, and away you go. But you've got that sort of ghostly essence to each of the figures, with then that sort of darker colour on the top, and I think it works really well. But you could easily go off and experiment in different ways and create something really interesting. These are 2 of my favourite characters from the Nighthaunt. You've got Lady Oleander, who is the Mortarch of Grief, and she was someone who has been sort of cursed to misery and self-loathing, and so this sort of cripples armies as she goes out onto the battlefield. If anyone were to look underneath her veil, they would be struck dead instantly by the fear and sorrow that you see in her eyes. She is then sort of followed by a couple of her sort of ladies in waiting from life, who carry caskets and things like that, and broken time things to show the moment that she eventually lost her life. And she is the sort of leader of one sort of section of the Nighthaunt. And what's also quite cool is that's then tied into Kurdos Valentian, who is the Craven King. He was a king who, through backstabbing, cajoling, treachery and everything else like that, got himself onto the throne only to die. And so now he is mocked constantly by his 2 brothers, I think they are, who go around after him, telling everybody how much of a craven, horrible king he is. And he's essentially, even though he crove power, that's now a phrase, he is sort of like tied inexorably to Lady Oleander as essentially her minion. And I love the fact that he sort of rose to power, and then Nagash smashed him down and turned him into this terrible, bitter figure that you see presented as part of this model range, which I think is really cool. And that carries through into all of the different heroes and characters that you get as part of the Nighthaunt army. And I genuinely think they're going to be a really fun and interesting army for you to paint. I know that they've been hit from a meta standpoint over the last little while, with all sorts of different things coming out, which have sort of turned them from a kind of hard-hitting force into a bit more of a control-style force, which is, it's up to you if that's interesting or not as a concept for an army. But I really like that they've sort of... a lot of the stuff that comes through is all about fear, breaking the enemy morale, making your opponent lose out on things as they go through, like, for example, the Mounting Dread and stuff like that. They've still got that sort of negative modifiers thing in there for being ethereal. So they still feel like a Ghost Force. I just don't think they feel like as much of a hard-hitting Ghost Force as they used to. Now, obviously, we've looked at Nagash in a couple of different books already. We've seen them in the Soulblight Gravelords. We've seen him in Flesh Eater Courts, but this seems like the faction where he is definitely worth having a look at in more detail, especially because he's surrounded by so many different spirits. And he's got a really nice profile anyway. A lot of people will be taking the Gash, but I really like him for this ability, which is once per turn, end of any turn, Hand of Dust. Pick a friendly enemy hero or monster in combat with this target, Nagash to be. Hide a dice in one of your hands or under one of 2 appropriate containers. Your opponent must pick one of your hands or containers. If they pick the one hiding the dice, this ability has no effect. If they pick the empty one, the target is automatically destroyed. Now that is fun stuff. 50% chance of dying every time you go into combat with Nagash, which I think is hilarious. I would love to get dusted by Nagash on a daily basis. Really, really interesting and fun, and feels like a really nice carryover from the first edition of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, where they had this sort of list of silly rules, like the person with the biggest beard would win. If you ever bowed down as one of the Tomb Kings from back in the day, then you would automatically lose because he never kneels and all that kind of stuff. It was just a really fun sort of period of experimentation for a game that was very much in its infancy and was rushed through. But I absolutely love what they did with it, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. That little crumbs of that have carried through into what we get as part of the faction nowadays. They've actually sort of really expanded the range as well. There are a few figures within here that I'm not massively excited about. I mean, these are all really nice. I really like the design of those. I think we need more of this kind of lore stuff popping in the book as well. I like all these smaller stories that sort of end up being slotted into these Battletomes now. I really like all of those. I think the Grimghast Reapers are nice. The Pyre-Ghosts are cool. The Craven Throne Guard, the Black-Hearted Lackeys, who sort of begrudgingly follow your characters around and defend them. Spirit Hosts are quite nice. I'm not sure on the Dreadscythe Harridans. They're a bit of a weird one to me, but it might just be the fact that they're painted slightly oddly, maybe. But yeah, not necessarily a fan of those, and I don't like the Hex Wraith. I think they look stupid, and they should be updated because they are very much old sculpts, especially when you've got things like the Dreadblade Harrowers who look amazing next to them. Seems weird that they're still in there. Although, nice to see that the Mirmorn Banshees are still in the mix, and they still look lovely. Fantastic stuff. And the Black Coach. Everyone loves a Black Coach, which is really cool to see. But yes, some nice stuff from an aesthetic standpoint when it comes to the Nighthaunt. They, of course, have their Spearhead army, the Cursed Shackle Horde. And you get some really nice stuff in here for how to quickly paint them. As you can see, insanely quick, especially with Coelia Greenshade doing a lot of the hard lifting alongside Dark Reaper and Night Lord's Blue. Very, very quick and easy to get them ready for the tabletop without much hassle. And I think in general they have a very good Spearhead, which is one of the other things that I wanted to latch onto. I think if you're looking to start out with something in Warhammer Age of Sigmar, this might be a good one to do it with. You have lots of stuff in here that kind of fits the idea of the Force. You have Discorporate and all that kind of thing as well. Mounting Dread, the Ethereal still in there, Cackling Arrival as well to bring one of your units onto the tabletop with the Bladegeist Revenants or the Dreadscythe Harridans. So you've got lots of ways to mix and match them, and Spearhead's a fun game in its own right anyway, so it's nice to see that they've been added into the mix for you to have some fun with. You do, of course, then have the Path to Glory stuff in there as well for the Anvil of Apotheosis, if you want to build your own set of narrative forces for use in the game, and then 2 of the Armies of Renown here for you to have some fun with as well. But I did want to latch on to this one, which I thought was really fun. So this is a Regiment of Renown that can be used with the Flesh Eater Courts, the Ozark Bone Reapers, or the Soulblight Gravelords. It comes with the Scriptor Mortis, the 5 Craven Throne Guard, and 5 more. Another nice little thematic set for you to throw into the mix. And it comes with Enemy of the Throne. Add 1 to hit rolls and wound rolls for units in this Regiment of Renown for attacks that target a sentenced unit. So he goes out and sentences people. They hunt them down and shoot them. So even then, Valentian doesn't have real control of them because they hate him. They will still go out of their way to do exactly what the Scriptor Mortis asks. And I love that kind of thematic tying together of all of those units to make it work as a faction. But yes, Nighthaunt, a fun Battletome. Definitely not sort of as up there with how people were sort of like looking at them as a sort of competitive force, I don't think. But again, not really interested in that sort of things. I just like learning about the lore and all that kind of stuff. I will say that Soulbound has been a massive improvement to this game, I think. The role-playing game by Cubicle 7 has really made Games Workshop up their ante when it comes to the stories and the background that they put in for all their characters, and the inclusion of things like maps and all that kind of thing as well. And so it's good to see that those battle tomes definitely deliver on that. Obviously, I didn't pick up any of the battle tomes from 3rd edition, because 4th is when I've really honed in on the game itself and really started enjoying it. But I really appreciate that they put a lot of stuff in here that sort of brings people up to date with the timeline of Warhammer Age of Sigmar and the Mortal Realms in general. So yes, if you're interested in playing as one of the Death factions and you're looking for something ghostly, maybe come and have a look at the thematic nature of the Nighthaunt and how they work on the tabletop. But yes, whoop-pow. Another battle tome flick through and another look at 5 things-ish that I love about a particular faction. Let me know your thoughts on the Nighthaunt down below in the comments. I would love to hear what you have to say. Like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. But most importantly, do the commenting, because I love hearing what you folks have to say in the comments, and we have a little dialogue about things as well. So yes, thank you very much. I'm going to dive into another video, but until then, bye for now.